I died in 1941, shortly after my daddy went off to war. I was just 15 and already sick when he was drafted. I think Mama knew I wasn't going to make it, and she begged Daddy to find a way out of the draft. I don't know if he tried or not, only that he left, and then I died a few weeks later. Mama took it hard. I watched her fall apart from behind the walls of our house. It was, at one point, a nice house. Then the letter came, saying that Daddy was killed by a Nazi's bullet. Mama couldn't take that at all. My Aunt Charlotte took Mama in to live with her, which probably saved her life. Sadly, I've lost touch with Mama since then. I suppose odds are pretty high that she's dead too by now. I think all the heartbreak around Daddy and me dying trapped my soul in this old house. And since Mama never sold it, I doubt she could have borne to. No one ever moved in. If she's dead, she apparently didn't will the house to anybody. It's still abandoned by all but me. It's a little ways out of town, trees and bushes that were just saplings when I was breathing are big, wild things now. They've never been pruned, not once. I can't go outside the house to have a look, but I bet it isn't even visible from the road. I'd guess the bank owns this place now, and they've just decided to let it rot. You know what, though? I'm glad. Because being in an old abandoned house is the only way I get to have any fun. How? The teenagers, friend. Teenagers started sneaking in here on dares back in the early 90s, right as the paint was beginning to peel. First, they threw rocks through all the windows. I didn't appreciate that, although I could see the fun in it. I haven't aged a day since I died, so I'm still a 15-year-old spirit. The very first pair who actually snuck in here were a couple of guys just older than me who were dared by their giddy girlfriends. As they crept around, these guys were whispering about whether or not the house was haunted. So I slammed the door and sent them running and screaming. Over time, I gave this place a reputation as a bona fide haunted house. Round October, each year, kids come, from other towns even, to experience my knocking and slamming. They all thought they could handle it, but I sent every one of them scurrying off. Something changed in the early 2000s. The teens started seeming less afraid of me, more curious. I couldn't scare them off as easily, which was fine since I enjoyed having them around. But they also started trying to talk to me. They bring in tape recorders and cameras to try to capture the stuff I do. I was always careful not to make anything move on camera, though. I liked how everyone else just had to take the kids I scared at their word. Providing proof of myself would have ruined the mystique. Some of the teenagers brought weird energy into the house. It was like having somebody track mud across the clean floor. Except instead of mud, it was anger, depression, jealousy, all sorts of ugly things. One thing you learn when you're dead is emotions are very tangible. They have a charge like a magnet or a battery. The right charge gives me energy, makes the house sort of hum. Some of the teens call it the house's aura or vibe. But if you bring the wrong charge in here, something too negative, messes everything up. I feel tired. The house feels older, and sometimes I can sense things moving outside. I don't mean outside like in the yard. I mean outside my spiritual periphery. See, ghosts like me are not the only type of spirit. There's some really dark stuff out there. Those dark spirits, well, they're attracted to negative energy. I sense them lurking, feel them sniffing out the anger and jealousy and sadness in here. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only thing keeping them out of this space. I am, in spite of everything, a pretty positive guy. There's one object which I will never ever allow into this house again. Whenever I see one, I immediately do something really scary, like make footsteps right behind the teenagers or brush at their hair. I do whatever I can to get them out of here. The object in question is something called a Ouija board. I hadn't never seen or heard of such a thing until the day I almost watched some poor kid lose his soul, and might have almost lost my house to an evil spirit. That, friend, after all of this existence, is a story I would like to tell you today. They came in a foursome: Gavin, Lily, Emma, and Roland. Gavin and Lily were the ghost enthusiasts. They came in with all the presuppositions one would expect from a couple of kids who think they know everything about a subject in which nothing is really known to the living. Emma didn't seem nearly as enthusiastic about the visit, even though she was the real empath in the group. That'll come in real handy for me later. You'll see. Now Roland made me uneasy. See, styles and fashion have changed so much since my time that I have difficulty reading people based on their appearance anymore. For example, 30 years ago, if someone crept in here at night wearing a pair of tattered jeans, I'd have assumed they were a junkie that needed to be chased out before they got too comfortable in my house. Nowadays, everybody's wearing jeans that look ready to fall apart. They're all the rage, as I've heard being hip called at one time or another. All this to say, I have to judge people by stuff that's intangible to the physical world, but potent to me. These things are like someone's mental balance or spiritual harmony. The closest thing I can compare these things to are smell, but you don't get them through your nose. You just kind of pick it up, much like when you drive by a hog farm and before you realize it, you're aware you're breathing in pig stink. Roland's pig stink comprised of grief, insecurity, and anger, disdain for the world and everything in it. I'm not a psychic, but I assumed right away that Roland had lost someone very close, probably recently. Roland had the spiritual posture of someone who's been personally insulted by death. The foursome crept around for a while, and I let them be. I wanted to feel them out. Between Emma's empathic abilities and whatever was going on with Roland, I guess I was sort of nervous about this bunch. Eventually they went upstairs and ended up in my room, of all places, the very room in which I died back in 41. That's when Lily pulled out the Ouija board, and I studied it while they all got comfortable, but I didn't really understand how it worked. Not until Gavin put this little triangle on the board that he called a planchette. Seeing the hole in the middle of the planchette, I understood how the letters on the board were laid out for spelling. The corners designated for yes or no. I found it a little strange that the board had a space for goodbye, but not one for hello. Anyway, I've become a master of suspense over the years, so I let the group play for a few minutes without a response. You know, what finally made me move the thing was that I wasn't sure I could. I wanted to find out. Started by just sliding it a tiny bit, not spelling anything or questioning and asking them anything. Boy, did that get my new friends excited. "Are you doing that?" Lily asked Emma, then Roland. Both shook their heads. Lily and Gavin shared a look. Then, all theatrically, she asked, "What's your name, spirit?" I could have spelled out something like Beelzebub or even Satan, but you have to build up to those sorts of things. Instead, I gave them my real name, B.O.B., Bob. I always went by Robert in life, but, well, Bob spells quicker. "Hi, Bob," Gavin said, after the group simmered down. "We've come here respectfully to try to get your story. We want to know about who you were, and if you'll tell us what the afterlife is like." "Well, Gavin, it's pretty fun because I get to mess with people like you," I thought, as I slid the planchette straight to no. I was trying to put myself in mind of a dark spirit, and I imagined such a thing would be pretty standoffish. "Oh, okay," Lily said. "Is there anything you do want to tell us?" "Can you ask it about, Roland said. "Well, we'll get there, don't worry," Gavin put in. I made him wait a few more seconds, then I slid the planchette around to spell "not safe." Oh, spooky, right? I told you I was good at this. I'd never used an Ouija board before, but same rules applied. Take it slow, keep it vague, give them lots of time to speculate and doubt themselves. "Not safe?" Gavin asked, but more to the group than to me. Roland squirmed like he couldn't get comfortable, or like he knew something he wasn't sharing. His pig stink bloomed around him, billowing out of the top of his head like a smokestack. I didn't like it. "Guys, can I be honest?" Emma asked. "I've actually been feeling a little unsafe, like something's off here. Maybe we should listen to what the board's saying." "Oh, Emma, no, don't spoil the fun." I guess she was picking up on her friend Roland's negative energy, but she was attributing it to me, attempting to come across like someone warning the group of danger, rather than threatening the danger myself. So I moved the planchette around to spell trapped. As the group clamored about what that might mean, I decided to shake Gavin and Lily's confidence. I hovered over them both, plucked one hair from each of their heads. This took an immense amount of energy from me, but it was worth it. Both folded neatly in half on the floor. Then I dropped both their hairs onto the Ouija board. Pandemonium ensued. Gavin jumped to his feet. Lily slid back, elbows tripping. The other two stayed put, but sat up, stiff as corpses. All four were shouting and cursing and swearing. Do you want to hurt us?" Emma asked, and dang it, I would have slid it to yes when they all touched the planchette again, if anyone else had asked, but I couldn't do that to poor Emma. I liked her. She seemed sweet, and the fact that she had a connection with the spirit realm, well, reminded me of how it felt to have my crush assigned as my lab partner in high school. It didn't mean anything was gonna happen between us, obviously. That would be ludicrous given my terminal case of death, but it made it feel more possible, I suppose. Like I said, I'm still 15. I slid the planchette to no. "Can I ask something?" That was Roland. Gavin gestured at him to go ahead after he sat back down. "Have you been following me?" Before I could answer, I felt myself pushed backwards by a soft but unmistakably powerful presence. The room's weight suddenly doubled. I'd never felt anything like this before. I'll never know what the living teens felt, but they all removed their hands from the planchette and leaned away from the board at the same moment. I stretched forward to move the planchette, realizing only later how that might have been the scariest thing I did that night. They all sat transfixed as I pushed the planchette around to spell careful. I wasn't trying to scare them, but I did worry a healthy dose of fear might be appropriate. I sensed movement from Roland's direction. He was looking down, staring at his own chest. Emma watched him closely. I believe she sensed what I saw. A shadow copy of Roland stood, rising from his body. At full height, he protruded from the boy's shoulders and neck. It stood well over 6 feet. It looked directly at me, held my gaze as it metamorphosed. Besides bearing Roland's general shape, it looked nothing like him. It was absolutely inhuman, with cheeks so thin and sunken I could see its jagged teeth outlined beneath the leathery skin. The eyes which held me were sunken far into the skull and as small as BBs, but they glowed brighter than anything else. The thing's smoky claws now commanded the planchette. Remember, Roland had asked the board if he was being followed. I was going to answer no before I was forced away by the new dark spirit. The dark spirit dragged the planchette towards yes, causing an anxious stir amongst the teenagers. It spelled safe now. The dark spirit's paper-thin lips parted slightly, and I could see pointed teeth as black as the rest of it. "Okay, that's good," Lily said. It says it's been following you, but that you're safe now, so that must mean it's like protecting you." "Yeah, that's definitely a good thing," Gavin agreed. "No, Gavin. No, Lily. It's not a good thing," I screamed at them, but, of course, they couldn't hear me. Emma glanced my way, though. The planchette started moving again, guided by the smoky claw of the figure protruding from Roland's back. It spelled Roland's name. Emma gripped his arm as if to anchor him. Then the dark spirit spelled out the cruelest, most obscene lie yet. "It's Mom." Again, the terrible figure sneered at me. I was now convinced that it was a demon. Emma's grip morphed into a sideways hug as she pulled poor Roland towards herself. He started crying. The other two exchanged nervous whispers, too quietly for even me to hear. The planchette began to move again, but I summoned every kilowatt of energy I could to reach through the pressure force field and stop it. The demon growled at me, and with a too long arm, it swiped me away. I spun backward like an astronaut through space. Emma sensed all of this. Still hugging Roland, she looked just above his head, exactly where the glowing demon protruded. "Mom, why did you do it?" Roland asked, voice choked by heartbreak. How could you just leave us like that?" This was real bad. I apologize for delaying what happened next, but you need to understand some things about death. See, there are different kinds of death. Mine was natural, but premature by natural standards. That sort of discrepancy, when combined with my mother's intense grief, created the environment which trapped me here. A death by human hands, be it murder or suicide, tears a hole through the separation between the living and the dead, like a bullet punched through paper. The holes take a long time to heal, if it ever does, and while it's open, just about anything can pass through. All this to say, the demon which had infested Roland had probably crawled through the hole left by his mother and attached itself to him. I bet it offered comfort at first, but judging by Roland's demeanor, even before the Ouija board session, it had already started getting mean. Classic demon trickery. If it could convince Roland to welcome it by pretending to be his mother's ghost, there's no telling how far it could take the possession. It might even kill Roland and harvest his soul. So when we left off, Roland, believing he was talking to his mother, had just asked how she could leave him. The demon began to answer, but I focused on getting the teens to safety. If I couldn't save Roland, then I wanted to at least try to protect the others. I'll admit, in the back of my mind, I was wondering what would happen if that demon fully manifested in my house. It had already demonstrated immense power over me, and that frightened me, for my own safety too. In the corporeal world, demons enter people. They dwell inside them and control them. Demons don't have that sort of use for us. Instead of possessing, they envelop and dominate us. They show us how little power and control we really have. I circumvented the group until I was behind Emma. That also put me right next to the demon, but it was occupied with the planchette, or maybe it didn't see me as a threat. Emma was the key. Her empathetic ability was the only tool I had left, but I wasn't sure how to use it. She'd shown that she could hear me, but could she understand? I didn't think so. I wondered if she might sense my touch. Keeping an eye on the demon, I took hold of Emma's free wrist, the one that wasn't on Roland's shoulder. She immediately flinched away. I understood why, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. I tried again, this time only touching the back of her hand, and I projected my desire to save her and her friends. I even whispered to her, "I'm here to protect you." At least one of these tactics worked, and Emma allowed my hand to stay. I slid my thumb behind hers so I could gently guide her hand to the Ouija board. "No, Emma, leave it alone," Gavin said. "God, that idiot, purporting to be so keen on the spirit world, yet being so dully insensitive to it." I could have punched him. I gave Emma a reassuring squeeze, which she emphatically understood. I guided Emma's hand towards the word goodbye at the bottom of the board and gave her another squeeze, then let her go. I felt confident that she would know what to do. "Guys, I think we need to end this," she said, her hand hovering over goodbye. "No!" Roland shouted, a deep anger boiling beneath his voice. "It's not his mother," I whispered to Emma, and thank the Lord she could understand me. Enough to matter, at least. Emma now pleaded with Gavin and Lily. "We need to end this session right now, guys. Something's really wrong. I can feel it." "I need to talk to her," Roland argued. "Roland, I don't think your mom is talking. I think it's something bad," Emma said, turning to him. "Yeah, she might be right," Lily said. "Before it said it was your mom, it was telling us we weren't safe and all that, remember?" Words can't describe how grateful I was to hear my silly prank may have saved the day. "Oh, yeah, spirits do lie to get what they want sometimes," Gavin said. "I can feel her, though," Roland whispered, but he sounded unsure. Emma's hand went to the planchette. Again, the demon's shadows clawed. I noticed her hand was outlined by a faint white aura. Whatever energy gave Emma her emphatic ability was something wholesome and beautiful. It forced the demon to retract angrily, almost like it had been burned. Gavin touched the planchette again, then Lily. They all looked at Roland, but he didn't move. Emma took his hand in her free one and pulled it towards the planchette. He still clearly did not want to end the session, but he allowed this to happen. They all four of them were touching the planchette. Emma slid it to goodbye, and as if it had never been there, the demon vanished. I whispered thanks to Emma, but closing the session had dulled her connection to me. I'll admit this made me a little sad, despite the victory we had won. The teenagers left shortly after, and I haven't seen them since. That must have been, 10 years ago now. It's hard to keep track. Roland didn't seem any lighter when he left that night. Unfortunately, I have to assume that he still had the attachment. But with a friend like Emma by his side, I hope he's been able to rid himself of it. Can't imagine she would have let him go on like that. The white light I saw around her hand made it easy to believe she saved him. And, like I already mentioned, Ouija boards aren't allowed in my house anymore. These days, kids are using all kinds of electronic equipment, though, and the Ouija board seems to be getting less popular. That's good. You just can never know what's really talking to you with one of those things. It could be a swell guy like me, or could be something much, much darker. It's best just to keep those channels closed. You can't ever really know who or what is speaking to you from the other side. The town of Ingleswood was in the middle of nowhere, according to the map. I'd never heard of it before. Neither had any of my friends when I asked them before leaving. Even more strange was receiving a correspondence from a relation I hadn't spoken to since I was a young child. It had come out of nowhere, a letter proclaiming my great-uncle to be dead, and informing me that I had inherited a slaughterhouse in a town I had never heard of. A slaughterhouse, of all things. I might have thought it was a prank, had there not been a rusted metal key included in the letter. Somehow, part of me knew the key was real, and that it belonged to the slaughterhouse my great-uncle had once owned. The ownership had been passed on to me, for reasons as of yet unknown, and I would have to drive up there in order to settle the inheritance. Which is why I was currently driving down a long serpentine road through a dense cluster of trees. It was still early afternoon, but the sky was gray and heavy, casting a dismal pall over the forest. Shadows crept out of the trees and onto the road, making it difficult to see without my headlights. I shuffled forward in my seat, hands gripping the wheel tighter as the trees grew around me. I'd been driving for just over 3 hours now, and it had been at least 30 minutes since I'd seen another car. According to my map, I should almost be there, yet I hadn't seen any signs of civilization. Nothing but empty fields and abandoned, ramshackle buildings in the middle of nowhere. And now, this forest that seemed endless and labyrinthine. The tires hit something in the road and the car jerked, throwing me forward in my seat. I slammed my foot on the brake and the car skidded to a halt, gravel hissing underneath my tires. I glanced in the rearview mirror and spied a shadow in the road, and I couldn't tell what it was. Had I hit an animal or something? I hadn't even seen anything. I debated ignoring it and driving off, but in the end, I cut the engine and climbed out of the car. The air beneath the trees was cold, and goosebumps prickled the back of my neck as I walked over to the misshapen lump in the road. The smell hit me first, the smell of old rotten blood. It was an animal carcass, a rabbit maybe, or something. It was too mangled and bloodied for me to tell. Flies buzzed around the torn flesh, the gray glint of bone poking from beneath the fur. Whatever it was, it had been dead for a while. I stood up and shook my head, lip curling against the stench. I'd move it off the road, but I didn't have anything with me that would do the trick, and I'd rather not touch it without proper protection. I would just have to leave it. Maybe carrion birds would come and pick it up later. I returned to my car, feeling a little bit nauseated, and drove off, watching the dead animal disappear behind me. 15 minutes later, and I finally broke free of the forest. Muted gray sunlight parted the clouds, dappling my windshield. On the other side of the trees were more fields, still noticeably empty. Found it odd that there were no cattle around, no sheep or pigs either. What was the use of a slaughterhouse if there was nothing to slaughter? In the distance, I glimpsed a small cluster of buildings. It was more like a settlement than a town. Stone and brick and straw. Not the kind of place I expected to find myself inheriting a building. Had my great-uncle really lived out in the middle of nowhere? Was that why I'd never heard of him? The road turned loose and rutted, and the car jerked and bumped as I drove closer to the town. A small sign, weathered and covered in mud, read, "Welcome to Ingleswood." At least it had a sign. The place wasn't a made-up town after all, I guessed. I pulled the car to a stop at the side of the road and pulled out my map again. The letter had contained specific coordinates to the slaughterhouse, which, according to the map, was a little distance away from the town itself, on the very border. If I followed the road for a couple more miles and then took a left, I would arrive at the house. A flutter of nervous energy tightened my stomach. Didn't really know what to expect when I got there, and what I was going to do about the situation. The only reason I'd driven down here was to get a better understanding of things, assess the area, try to figure out what to do. Should I just sell the slaughterhouse, or should I move here? The latter option didn't sound particularly appealing after getting a glimpse of the area, but wouldn't know until I had a proper look around, I guess. I followed the loose gravel road for a little while longer before spotting a turnoff to the left. The remains of a broken stone wall lined the path, and I spotted another sign that was too rusted to read. Signaled to turn, even though there was no other car in the area. I followed the path through the sheltered wooden area until I reached a small house. It was more of a cottage, really, with white brick and a thatched roof. The place had an air of dilapidation about it, as though nobody had lived here for quite some time. Considering my great-uncle had passed recently, I knew that wasn't true. Beside the house was a large freestanding shed. A rusted padlock was chained around the door, and I knew without a doubt that the key I'd been given was the key to the shed. Did that mean the shed was the slaughterhouse? I parked the car on the grass and climbed out. The air out here was fresh and pleasant, a nice change from the city, though beneath the fragrance of nature I could smell something else, something darker, richer, old blood and rust and butchered meat. I threw a brief glance at my surroundings. My gaze skimmed past the trees and the field and the faint curl of smoke blotting the distant sky. I couldn't hear anything beyond the wind. No bird song, no chittering bugs. Couldn't hear cars or people or anything that would suggest there was a town nearby. I let out a sigh. Maybe it would feel lonely living out here. I was used to the city, after all. I grabbed my rucksack from the truck and fished out the letter and the key I'd been given. No key to the house, which was odd. I'd phoned my great-uncle's executor before driving out here, but apparently all material belongings were still inside the house, and the shed key was the only thing that had been passed on to me directly. I walked up to the cottage door and tried the handle. Locked, unsurprisingly. If I couldn't figure out a way to get inside, I'd call the damn locksmith out here, which could take hours. Muttering in frustration, I began rooting around the rocks and broken plant pots sitting outside the cottage. Whatever plants had once resided there were now withered and shriveled, their roots black and gnarled as they poked through the soil. I turned one of the empty pots over and grinned when my eyes caught a glint of silver. I hadn't really gotten my hopes up, so finding the key immediately lifted my spirits. At least now I could get inside the house. Leaving the slaughterhouse locked for now, I headed inside the cottage. The air was stale and heavy with dust, and my eyes immediately started to water. How long had it been since anyone had opened that door? I wasn't familiar with the circumstances of my great-uncle's death, so I wasn't sure if he'd spent his last moments in the house or not. That thought made me shudder, as my nose picked up the smell of damp and mold. Apart from some minimal furnishings, the house was mostly bare. I didn't know what kind of man my great-uncle had been, but apparently he didn't like clutter, and very rarely dusted. I ran a finger over the sideboard in the hallway and grimaced as a thick layer of dust clung to my skin. If I did decide to stay here, I was going to take a lot of work to get this place up to standard. The longer I stayed here, the more I wanted to leave without looking around. But I couldn't ignore it forever. At some point, I had to assess the state of the slaughterhouse and make a decision about what to do. I went through each room, casting a cursory look over the furniture and testing the electricity and the water supply. Everything seemed to be running, which was a bonus. I'd already planned to stay the night here, so having hot water and lights would make it a lot easier. Upstairs, I paused on the landing and peered out the window. At the back of the house was a field of brown, uncut grass and some stilted shrubs. I could see the edges of the shed beside the cottage, the old wood stained and weathered. In the distance, I could see the cluster of houses that formed the village. As I was about to turn away, I glimpsed movement at the edge of the property, amongst the tree line. Someone stood between the trees, watching me. I couldn't get a good view of their face, but in the brief glance, it seemed gray and hollow, like wax. The figure darted away through the trees and disappeared. I frowned, the unease from earlier returning. Was it a villager? Shaking it off, I searched the upstairs room. Large master bedroom and bathroom, a linen cupboard, a smaller guest bedroom, and that was all that was here. Like downstairs, everything up here was old and run down, and covered in a thick layer of dust and mildew. I closed the bedroom door behind me and went back down into the kitchen, where I'd left my rucksack. The rusted key to the slaughterhouse sat on the table, just where I'd left it. I figured it was about time to see what I was dealing with next door. Grabbing the key, I left the house and went across to the shed. The metal of the padlock was ice cold against my fingertips as I inserted the key and twisted it. The lock fell away and the door edged open with a creak. Shadows spilling out across my feet. I peered into the darkness as I gripped the edge of the door and pulled it open further. The air inside smelled stale and old. The same undercurrent of old blood ran beneath the surface. Drawing in a deep breath, I pushed the rest of the way in and stepped inside, letting the dull afternoon light filter inside. The slaughterhouse was nothing like what I'd expected. Inside was nothing but an empty shed. The wood was damp and starting to rot, the ground full of old hay. There was no equipment that you'd expect in a slaughterhouse, no cold room to store meat. It was just an empty shed. Perhaps it wasn't a functioning slaughterhouse after all. Then why had it been called such in the inheritance? Something glinted in the sunlight, and I looked up. Several large metal hooks hung from the ceiling, the kind that you hung meat on. But what was the point when there was nowhere to prepare it? Unless I was missing something. This was a plain old shed with some leftover meat hooks still stuck to the ceiling. I raked a hand through my hair and sighed. Was it a waste coming all the way out here? I shook my head. Not a waste. I still had to figure out what to do with this place, now that it was legally mine. Leaving the slaughterhouse, I relocked it and pocketed the key before heading back into the house. It was getting on in the afternoon, and I was tired from driving all morning, so I decided to grab a bite to eat while considering my options. By the time evening had rolled around, I still hadn't made up my mind about the place. There wasn't much merit in staying here if the slaughterhouse couldn't actually be used, and I didn't particularly fancy being stuck in the middle of nowhere. I could sell it, but not as it was. It would take a bit of work to get it into decent shape and make it appealing to potential buyers. The final option was just leave it here to gather dust, but it seemed like a waste. I had debated heading to the village to see who lived there, but after spying the strange figure watching me from the trees, part of me had been reluctant to venture too far from the house. Maybe I'd walk down there in the morning. As dusk grew outside, shadows encroaching further into the cottage, and a chill crept into my bones, I turned on most of the lights and went around drawing the curtains to block out the night. I wasn't fond of sleeping in unfamiliar places, so I spread my sleeping bag on the floor of the downstairs sitting room instead of upstairs. Using hot water from the kitchen, I made myself some instant noodles and ate them from the packet, listening to the radiator clank and groan as it rattled to life. Being on my own in a strange house was starting to make me feel a little unsettled, so I turned on the television to fill the silence. Nothing but static burst from the screen, so I switched it off just as quickly. With nothing else to do, I headed to bed early. I nestled into my sleeping bag and spread another blanket over me to ward off the chill. Fell asleep the second my head hit the pillow. I woke up early the next morning to the sound of someone tapping at the window. Blinking away the grogginess, I sat up. The room was still dark, shadows lingering around the edges. I reached over to switch on the lamp and stretched the crinks out of my neck from camping on the floor all night. What was making that noise? The curtains were still drawn, but I could see movement in the gap between the edges. Climbing stiffly to my feet, I walked over to the window and tentatively pulled the curtains aside, peering out. A beady black eye stared back. It was a crow. Ruffling its inky black feathers, it tapped its beak 3 more times against the glass before flying away. I watched it go, frowning. Dawn had yet to break, and the sky was still in the clutches of night. According to my watch, it wasn't even 5 a.m. yet. But I was awake now, so I dragged myself into the kitchen to get some instant coffee. I slept right through the night, but I remembered having strange dreams in the midst of it. Dreams about meat and fresh and bloodied meat hooks. No doubt because of the circumstances I'd found myself in. When I returned to the living room, I found the key to the slaughterhouse sitting on top of my rucksack. I thought I'd left it on the kitchen table, and seeing it elsewhere left me momentarily disconcerted. Had I moved it there? I must have. There was nobody else here but me. Maybe I'd slept less well than I thought. I didn't trust the pipes enough to have a hot shower, so I changed into a fresh pair of clothes and drank my coffee until the light grew outside. It was another damp gray day, and the forest was as silent as it had been last night. Wherever that crow had flown off to wasn't anywhere close by. Once it was light enough to see by, I grabbed the key to the shed and went outside to investigate. I didn't really expect it to look any different, but maybe having had a full night's rest would give me a different kind of insight into what to do with this place. I unlocked the door, letting the padlock and chain fall to the ground with a heavy thump, and pulled it open. Inside was dim, and it took me a second for my eyes to adjust. As soon as I glanced inside, I froze, my heart lurching in my throat. The slaughterhouse was no longer empty. Thick slabs of dark meat hung from the rusted hooks, the air thick with the smell of fresh blood. What the hell? Where had it come from? Last night there had been nothing in here. The shed had been locked, and as far as I was aware, the only key to open it was in my possession. How had this meat gotten in here? Who was responsible? I took a step inside, feeling perturbed and perplexed by the discovery. There was just under a dozen chunks of flesh, as lean and expertly cut, glistening red in the morning light. I wasn't familiar with meat in this form, so I couldn't tell you which animal it belonged to, but I could tell it had been prepared recently. All of a sudden, I felt unnerved and unsafe. What was going on here? This was supposed to be my property, yet someone had clearly been creeping around here last night, hauling slabs of meat into my shed. I didn't like the thought of that at all. As I tried to sift through my thoughts, I heard approaching footsteps from behind. My heart pulsed faster as I turned around, not sure what to expect. A group of about 20 people were approaching my property from the trees. The first thing I noticed was their gauntness. Like that mysterious figure I'd seen in the forest, their skin was pallid and their flesh sunken, their clothes hanging like rags off bony shoulders. They looked starved. "Meat," one of the strangers cried, their voices hoarse and brittle. "We have meat again." "We have meat again," someone echoed. "We are saved." "What?" I muttered, stumbling back in surprise as the group of people, presumably from the village, drew closer. "What's going on?" "You brought us meat. You saved us," the older villager in the front of the mob said, reaching out his hands in a thankful gesture. Before I could do or say anything, the villagers piled into the shed and began removing the meat from the hooks, slinging it over their shoulders with joyous cries. "Wait, what are you doing?" I blurted, aghast at their action. The man from before tottered up to me, his eyes sunken and his cheeks hollow. "Thank you. We're so happy the slaughterhouse has a new owner." He seemed about to turn away, so I quickly grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his flesh. What is going on here? Where did this meat come from? A slow smile spread across the man's face, revealing pink, toothless gums. You don't know? This place is cursed. See? He pointed into the shed, and I followed his gaze. Fresh meat was starting to grow from the hook, materializing from air. The flesh grew and expanded until it was the same size as the others, and one of the villagers quickly removed it from the hook. I stared in bewildered silence, struggling to put the pieces together of what I was seeing. What was happening here? Where was the meat coming from? How could it just appear like this? I still don't understand, I finally uttered in a hoarse whisper. Felt like I was in the middle of a dream or a nightmare. The hooks give us flesh, the man said. But where does it come from? I said, shaking my head. This flesh that never stops growing on these hooks is the flesh of the slaughterhouse's owner. It is your flesh, the man explained, his dark eyes glistening in the dimness. Behind me, meat continued to grow from the hooks, and the villagers continued to harvest it. My flesh? I whispered, the words sticking in my throat. What do you mean? I looked down at myself. I was still intact. How could it be my flesh? It's a reproduction of your flesh. This flesh never rots, never goes bad. It is as alive as you are. The man still wasn't making any sense. How could it be my flesh? How was any of this possible? These villagers, this place, were crazy. The longer I stayed, the more danger I would be in. I had to leave as soon as possible. As if reading my thoughts, the man placed a hand on my arm, a warning look in his eye. There are conditions you must follow. However, he said, his voice a low rasp, if you ever leave this town, your bond to this place will be broken, and the flesh will start to rot. My mouth went bone dry, the ground feeling unsteady beneath my feet. You mean, he nodded, when the meat begins to rot, so do you. Your body will decay and eventually perish, and we, the ones who rely on your flesh, will starve. You have no choice but to stay here for the rest of your life and feed us with the flesh from your body. This is your duty, he said, tightening his old crooked fingers around my arm. There is no escape. You must accept your fate or wither away, just like the owner before you. I hadn't seen Mike in a few months. He'd been buried in work, and our usual weekend nights out had all but disappeared. Then he called me on a Thursday and invited me over for drinks. I jumped at the invite, but I took note of how depressed he sounded on the phone. By the time I got there, Mike had already started drinking and was slurring his words pretty badly. A dark cloud seemed to hover over him, which got worse when he drank. I finally asked what had been going on with him, and Mike turned even darker. Afraid, he said it had to do with work. I never really knew what Mike did for a living. I did know that he worked for the city in the tech department, and was involved in the CCTV surveillance network, but I never knew what his day-to-day was like, which he began to describe in detail. Mike explained that there were thousands of cameras scattered throughout the downtown area, the outlying neighborhoods, as well as in the suburbs of our million-plus people city. His responsibility was to categorize and archive all the incoming footage. Most of the footage went into a very general classification and was saved to a hard drive and identified with a lengthy combination of numbers and letters for categorically archiving them. They were truly meant to be forgotten about. It was a pretty expansive task, but Mike had designed and built an AI screening program that detected common patterns in footage, which selected out anomalous behaviors for later scrutiny. He said the vast majority wasn't even noteworthy. Something like 99.9% was just trash. Then, of course, there was the 0.1%. The car accidents, the assaults, the swarmings, the abductions, the murders, those went into a special archive for use in criminal investigations. And then there was the even more exclusive 0.001%. These were held in a classification archive that contained footage of captured events that were, from all accounts, unexplainable. This was called the Tartarus Archive. I looked up the word Tartarus after and discovered that it was one of the darkest, deepest prisons in Greek mythology. It was said that if you dropped an anvil from heaven, it would take 7 days for it to reach the earth. It would take another 7 days for the anvil to reach Tartarus. It was the place they had put the Titans when they had found that nowhere else could contain them. As it turned out, the name was quite fitting for the archives. Some of the footage could be simplified to strange optical anomalies in the camera, and coincidences of light, or a crackhead on a bender going through the subway system. Other footage defied logic. The others are what captured Mike's mind that evening. He'd been breaking protocol and bringing hard drives home at night. In fact, he'd been splicing the footage together, capturing and compiling repeat aberrations, and editing them into a linear sequence. Mike wanted to show me some. It wasn't in a bragging or showing off kind of way either. It felt more like the sharing of a heavy burden. I asked if showing me would get him in trouble, but he waved the idea away. I said, yeah, obviously I want to see what's going on in the city. Mike led me into his workroom. There was a monitor and a tower and a pile of externals set up. We sat down and he skimmed through some drives nervously. Then he landed on one. Mike told me this anomaly was codenamed Lincoln Spectre. He pressed play. On the large screen, black and white footage started up, showing me Lincoln Avenue, one of our less active downtown streets, at 3 a.m. The camera angle showed me the length of Lincoln Avenue as it led into the downtown core. The street appeared to be empty and quiet. From a side road, a woman emerged, walking towards the camera. As she approached the intersection, she turned over her shoulder and appeared to scream. The woman took off, spreading past the camera, which cut to a new, wide angle from another camera across the street. We watched the woman running frantically, seeming to be chased, but she was the only one on the street. There was no one else anywhere near her. The woman kept screaming as she ran, and the camera kept following, cutting between different CCTV angles. We watched as the woman was chased in the middle of an empty intersection. She fell then, cowering as if something massive was standing over her. The woman's neck stiffened, and she began to levitate off the ground suddenly. Her body looked like a rag doll as something lifted her by the throat until she was floating a dozen feet above the road, in the middle of the intersection. Then the woman's head snapped to the left, and her body fell back to the ground. The video ended and went black. I was shocked. Mike saw my expression and said, "You ain't seen nothing yet." I asked if what I had seen was real, if that was unaltered raw footage. And Mike said that all he had done was put the clips together. Hell, none of the content had been touched. He told me the accident ended up being written up as a hit and run, and the case was left figuratively open for more evidence to amass, which it never would. The department kept footage hidden, claiming it was a camera malfunction. No one outside of Mike and his boss had seen the video, and how the poor woman had actually died. I started to understand the air of sombrance Mike was carrying around. Mike started the next video. This one was codenamed Black Crab, and was much longer than the previous one. It started in the subway system, at the underground Walkley station, shortly after closing up for the night. Walkley was the last stop on the route, and the exterior was shouldered by a new housing development on one side, and an untouched forest and swampland on the other. The camera was pointed down along the subway platform on the east side, and it showed its entire length with benches and garbage cans populating it. At the far end of the tunnel, there was only darkness. The lights on the platform shut off, and the station went black. The camera switched to night vision, and everything became more visible. My eyes trained on the platform, waiting for something to happen. Finally, there was movement. It was coming from the tunnel. It was difficult to identify what exactly it was at first, since the movements were strange and the footage was grainy. But it got closer to the camera, and I got a better look. It resembled a human, a man, but he was walking on his hands and feet, upside down, with his back arched and his stomach pointing to the ceiling. He had long dark hair that dragged along the ground, and he wore the tattered layers of an old jacket and torn pants. He moved like a crab, jerkily yet quickly, and despite his posture, he made his way easily up the stairs. The footage cut to a new camera in the dark hallway leading to the stairs out of the station. We watched the crab walker claw up 2 steps at a time, and then crawl over the turnstile and towards the exit. The footage cut again, now showing the exterior of the train station. The crab walker squeezed and twisted and maneuvered his body through the locked and closed entrance. It looked impossible to accomplish, but he managed it. Once outside, the crab walker eyed his surroundings before skittering off towards the woods and disappearing. The footage cut to an hour later and revealed the crab walker reappearing from the woods. He was dragging a small animal by the tail in his teeth. It looked like a cat. The crab walker squeezed back through the gate, crawled through the station, and disappeared into the tunnel again. Mike saw my expression and told me that there was more. He showed me the length of the video, which was over an hour. Mike had compiled over 20 sequences of the crab walker creeping out of the subway station and into the woods. Mike skimmed through the videos towards the end, and we watched the crab walker coming out of a sewer in the downtown alleyway. It crawled over to a pile of garbage bags and cardboard boxes. Then it jumped onto them, and some kind of vicious frenzy ensued. There was someone else in the pile of garbage. Hands and feet thrashed about as they were struggling for their life. Then the movement stopped, and the hands and feet went still. The crab walker's body moved jerkily about, but I couldn't see what was happening because of the darkness and all the garbage bags and boxes obscuring the camera view. Mike leaned over to me and whispered that the crab walker was eating a homeless man. This caused a criminal investigation as the dead body was found mutilated and festering in the open alleyway. Mike followed up on the inquiry. What he discovered was the crab walker, who authorities believed to be a man named David Fletcher. Decades ago, David had been a prominent lawyer with a family. One Christmas, there was a huge fire, and his wife and kids were killed in the blaze. It was David's fault. He had lost everything, including his mind, it seemed. Everyone has a breaking point, whether they know it or not, a place where they've been too far and then snap. David had apparently found his. Family and friends described his descent as nightmarish. David lived on the street, becoming addicted to drugs and tumbling into mental illness. The last anyone knew of him was from 10 years prior. He'd thrown himself in front of a subway at the Walkie station, and no one had heard from him since. It appeared that somehow David had survived the subway hit. His back had broken and healed oddly, causing him to move the way he did. He'd adapted to the new posture and lived in the darkness of the subway for years, finding sustenance from drain water and wild animals that he caught. That was what Mike found out, at least, but then he said that was just the answer the investigators gave at Discovery. Who knew where the truth actually lay? Mike said there was always an answer for the videos he found. Whether the answers were true or not, no one knew. But the ones that had become public all needed explanations, however absurd. Either way, David was never found and didn't reappear on the subway footage. Mike plugged in a new hard drive. He poured a fresh drink and told me this was the one that had troubled him. The file was codenamed Cloud Mirror. I wasn't honestly sure I wanted to see it, but before I could object, Mike had pressed play. All the monitors lit up with footage from different intersections downtown on the exact date and time of each other. There were 5 in total. The streets on each of the screens were empty and quiet. No cars, no people. Suddenly, at the exact time in the center of the intersection, a small glow pulsed into existence. It was some kind of orb, roughly the size of a bowling ball. The streetlights around it pulsed with energy waves as the orb grew larger. It grew to the size of a beach ball, then it flashed out. The streetlights went back to normal, and the intersection was as lifeless as it had been before. I asked Mike what had happened. He told me he had gigs of footage of the orb and had watched them repeatedly. He didn't know what they were. At first, they had just started by chance. Mike clicked on the next video, and again 5 monitors lit up with the strange intersection and time of night, but it was several weeks later. The streetlights glowed and pulsed, and an orb manifested into existence again. It grew to its beach ball size, but then it altered the surface. Something gas-like replaced it, growing outward into a couch-sized cloud of deep gray. One of the cameras was closer, so I got to see the small cloud in detail. It looked like a volcanic eruption wrapping around itself. They were large, constantly morphing blobs that curled around from the glowing center, resembling a mandelbulb fractal as a gaseous-based organism. It was fascinating to see them floating in the middle of the street, so alien to our roads and stoplights and street lamps. Then they began to move. Gliding down empty roads, the cameras cut to different angles, following the clouds on some unknown paths, zigging and zagging into new streets and through alleyways. Then they stopped. The clouds hovered in the center of the intersection. They lowered to ground level, standing straight up like a large coffin. Holding rigid to their shapes, their exteriors continued to shift and mold together like magnets made of smoke. Something on one of the monitors caught my eye. Down the street, people appeared. They'd seen the clouds and were walking towards it. The group looked drunk and fascinated by the floating entities, so much so that they approached it. As they did, the clouds became brighter. The street lamps began to pulse. The group were in some kind of a trance, staring into the morphic blob. One of the group, a guy, stared into it like a zombie, then walked right into the cloud and disappeared. None of the group tried to stop him. Instead, another one followed him in, and another, and another. All 5 members of the group disappeared into the cloud. Then they reappeared, one at a time. The first guy, and then in the order they came in. Only they weren't stumbling or boisterous or drunk now. They were walking upright, using minimal movements. They formed into a perfect 5-person circle for several seconds after quick words, then turned and all went in separate directions. Their strides and arm swings were all sped up to match. Another monitor showed a similar situation with a large group of people, lost in revelry as they marched one after another into the cloud. Each monitor showed the same thing, people entering the clouds and coming back out different. Mike stopped the video. I asked him if he'd shown this to anyone. He said he hadn't, not even to his boss, which was a problem because he had a meeting with his boss in the morning to discuss the missing footage. I asked why he didn't show the footage to his boss. This footage seemed more serious. People were being replaced by something. Mike sighed and put a new video on. The main monitor lit up and showed a new downtown street. The date was from earlier this week, and one of the clouds was floating in the intersection. A middle-aged couple was walking nearby, the husband with a slight limp on his right leg. The couple saw the clouds and were sucked in by their aura. They approached it, eyes wide and mouths open. Both husband and wife entered the cloud and disappeared. After a moment, they reappeared and the husband's limp was magically gone. Mike turned to me and said, "That was my boss and his wife." Before starting this post, even if it's a story that happened years ago, I just want to make it clear that every name included in this post was changed to make sure to protect the kid's privacy. You see, ever since I met this kid, he's always intrigued me. But no matter how hard I try to ignore the little strange things surrounding him, I can't seem to brush off that awful feeling which shakes my composure. A feeling that creeps on me every time I look at him from afar, from where he can't see me. I was 36, and he was no more than 7. I should be responsible. I was his teacher, be able to rationalize everything and keep my head cool no matter the circumstances. Yet, it's getting harder and harder to act like nothing is wrong with how his brain is working. I'm not trying to inculpate him. I actually fear what his behavior might do to me in the following years. Hence why I'm writing this. You see, this particular student, whom I'm calling Basile, for clarity's sake, has always acted a bit out of it, as my colleagues and some of my friends put it. He's a kid that's always loved smiling, for no particular reason. He just loves doing it. However, I started to sense that something was wrong with him when he wouldn't stop, even after getting hurt or messing up in class. I can guarantee that Basile might be the clumsiest student I've ever had. What generally unnerves me the most about Basile, however, is his prolonged periods of complete blackout. He has a tendency to completely shut his brain off to the rest of the world and simply watch in silence the emptiness around him, only coming back with a laugh and teary eyes when someone urges him to respond. It's like he lives in his own little world most of the time. Sadly, it's a major deterrent in his social life. Given that he mostly dozes off or shuts his brain down during class, he's a subject of mockery that can resemble bullying a bit too much for my taste. I try my best to mitigate this negative attention he seems to always get, but that doesn't stop him from slowly becoming a pariah during breaks. To be fair, Basile does have something close to a friend. Well, at least he seems to like him, even if that feeling isn't mutual. It's a kid that I'll call Quentin, and what you should remember about him is that he unfortunately got caught in a car crash with his family. All survived with more or less minor injuries, except for Quentin, who lost the usage of his legs. He was inconsolable for weeks, mostly because he couldn't partake in his favorite sport anymore. That's when Basile started to become extremely interested in him, and when I truly started to see just how deep the rabbit hole surrounded this kid goes. Quentin, after finally gathering the courage to go back to school for the first time in months, was immediately jumped by Basile. Obviously, a lot of them were curious or saddened by his state. Basile, however, really was the only one to be excited about it. He didn't seem to have any ill will towards his now disabled comrade, yet the whole class was off-put by his earnest attempts to cheer Quentin up, often resulting in some fighting and crying on Quentin's side. Strangely, his protests never deterred Basile, who simply continued this thing without bearing any hard feelings or getting angry at the other kids. He became way more active, but was still trapped inside his bubble. He could still spend minutes, maybe hours, just staring into space, especially in class. In the end, I think it worked out, though. After days of trying to make Basile stop bothering Quentin, the latter came to me and simply asked to let him be. Even if I don't know why he's changed so much, he's the only one at school that treats me like a person. Doesn't make everything a pity party. He's kind of nice, even if he's weird, so I don't mind his presence. It didn't feel satisfying at all. Didn't feel right at all. Nonetheless, since both parties seemed content with the situation, I couldn't get involved in all of this. At least, I shouldn't have. But Basile's behavior seemed stranger and stranger to me. He was starting to speak of seeing Quentin walking in an empty space. He drew disturbing imagery, sometimes simply coloring the page with one color, before speaking of the many wonders inside the color. I couldn't bear it anymore. I needed to find its root. I wondered many times before going through with this, if I was going insane. Still, my curiosity and my fear won over my rationality, so I asked Basile to stay in class. He didn't seem to really mind or question why I asked him. Thankfully, he actually came instead of forgetting about the appointment, as he tended to do for anything related with administration. However, his clumsiness or lack of attention led to him hitting a wall and getting the door to his face while trying to walk up to my office. I also noted his lack of focus when I tried to reassure him that he didn't look too bad. He seemed entirely comfortable with how he acted these past few weeks. No regret or self-doubt. This led me to audibly sigh. Basile didn't seem to catch my exasperation. His expression remained unwavering. A small smile, empty eyes, and it was as if he was frozen like a statue. Knowing I wouldn't go far by trying to find a roundabout way to get him to explain his change in attitude, I opted for a more straightforward approach. Basile, I need you to be honest with me. What is it, Teach? The sentence actually piquing his curiosity. I spoke again, hoping my tone wouldn't betray any kind of nervousness. What's going on with Quentin? Why did you suddenly feel the need to be nice towards him? His apathy was replaced by something I couldn't read at the time. He looked extremely embarrassed, but also guilty. And still, he let out a laugh. It didn't sound childish despite his age. It sounded desperate. I can make things right, if I can take care of Quentin. He was starting to shake as his voice became weaker and weaker. However, this sudden show of weakness was quickly replaced by a sudden jump onto my desk. "Teach, can I ask you a question?" I backed off a bit before actually answering. "Sure, but stay in your chair, please." He made a small, apologetic sound before resuming his talking. "If something disappears, it's -1, right?" I had no idea where he was going with this. "Yeah?" Ignoring my confusion, he continued. "But if something is given in return, it's +1, right?" I nodded in response. He was beaming with misplaced pride. He probably misunderstood my confusion, or thought getting his teacher confused made him smarter. "Well, if -1 meets +1, then they cancel each other out, so nothing has happened in the end." I couldn't bear seeing the conversation get more and more astray, so I asked, "Basil, where are you going with this?" Then it hit me. Is this about Quentin's lost legs and how you're trying to be an uplifting influence on him? Is that it? I appreciate you trying so hard to brighten his day, but I wasn't sure what to say next, or if him comparing this ordeal to a mathematical operation was a good sign or not. But in the end, I took it as just a little boy being concerned for a classmate's well-being. However, he looked at me strangely. "No, the -1 is me. The +1 is Quentin's bad day." I was dead wrong. His cold answer, one that seemed so logical in his mind, frightened me. This was the first time in my career I felt any kind of fear towards one of my pupils. I struggled to get out another word, but I needed to know more. What do you mean by that?" He smiled brightly, innocently. "Well, I'm a bad kid, so this accident gives me a chance to be better." Flabbergasted, outraged, speechless. These words wouldn't even be enough to describe how I was feeling at that moment. Several thoughts plagued my mind. What kind of 7-year-old thinks and acts this way? How can he say things like that with such a carefree attitude? What about that moment of weakness? Did I imagine it? I tried to pry a bit more, but he wouldn't speak about it. His brain had shut down when I asked about why he thought of himself this way. He left my office without listening to me, that unnerving boy disappearing from my view, although his little cries in the corridor didn't escape my ears. I had the urge to join him in the corridor and comfort him, especially if he actually was putting up a front when talking about his self-esteem issues. Yet I stopped myself. I rationalized that me suddenly showing up wouldn't help him open up to me. But as he left, I heard his footsteps coming to a sudden halt. A weak "Dad" was all I could fully understand, before the footsteps came back in my direction. Basil was standing in my doorway, his eyes darker than anything I'd ever seen. He wasn't saying anything, just looking at me at what felt like an eternity. I tried to say something, but the words just died in my throat. He opened his mouth to answer my almost question. "If only I could trade your life for his, you invading prick." But it was deep, too deep. His voice couldn't belong to a child. Still, Basil was the only thing in front of me. He had to have said it. I was petrified. He left without saying another word. The suffocating silence of the classroom was all that reminded me of the fact that I was alive. After minutes, maybe hours, I continued my usual routine as if nothing had happened. I locked the classroom, went to my car, and drove myself home as I sat on my rundown sofa. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except I had no recollection of ever doing that. It was as if my mind had been completely shut down. I simply awoke in the middle of the night, briefly wondering how I even got back to my flat before going back to sleep. Well, sleep is a generous word to describe what happened that night. Nightmares kept me company, and I had to call off the next day due to my unbelievable tiredness. Eventually, I calmed down and went back to my job, but I became wary of Basil. I found myself staring at him more and more, hoping to prevent him from catching me by surprise. However, my behavior ended up being a frequent subject of questions and discussions among the students. Not wanting the situation to get out of control, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I needed to stop being worried about one of my students, especially if my behavior could end up damaging said student's reputation. I was a professional. I couldn't let my bias overtake my duties. I was scared. It pains me to admit it now, but I found myself terrified of Basile. Being scared of a grade schooler. How pathetic. That's why it took me a month to properly gather up the courage to ask for a meeting with his family. In the meantime, the rumors had begun to run rampant, and some people tried to bully Basile. I felt ashamed. It was exactly what I had predicted, yet I could not act to defend this child. Luckily, Quentin had stepped in, even amongst his former friends. I wasn't sure if their friendship was healthy, but I was glad he was around, no matter how uncomfortable I got while watching them play. Sometimes, Basile would show Quentin people or events that didn't seem to exist or happen. He could also hurt him by saying that he could see him running freely somewhere, or abruptly stop his movements to cry out at something. As for Quentin, sometimes he would brawl with Basile, or a bully, but most of the time, he would push Basile out of harm's way. It was strange how poor his luck seemed to be. Nonetheless, they were happy like this. I didn't know what to think. Still, I needed to meet his family. So, I stopped finding excuses. That's why 2 weeks later, I found myself at the doorstep of a small but seemingly cozy house. I was greeted by a middle-aged lady, looking slightly older than I was. She invited me in, but I found no sign of Basile, only pictures of him with a man I didn't recognize. When I asked her about her son, her face illuminated with motherly joy. "Oh, my little angel isn't here right now. He's currently playing with his new friend." I tried to get her to clarify what she meant. "Are you talking about Quentin?" She clapped her hands together. "Yes, that's his name. He's one of your students, I assume." Poor thing. She didn't add anything else, but she didn't have to. She knew about the accident. That meant I could safely bring out the topic of Basile's behavior more easily. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, Quentin's been the subject of something terrible." She cut me off before I could add anything else. "That's why I'm proud of my baby for deciding to become his friend. I was scared he would end up alone, but to hear that those two are getting along so well, it's truly a miracle." The heavy feeling in my chest came back. No point in beating around the bush. I needed to be more direct. "About that, miss, I think your son's not being a healthy support system for Quentin." Her cheerful behavior slowly faded away, being replaced by something I could only describe as saddened resignation. Her smile was still there, but much thinner, her eyes pleading me to stop talking. A faint, "Oh no," left her lips. I found it strange that his first friend was handicapped because of... I found myself insisting, pushing her to tell me why Basile is the way he is. Tears started to stroll down her face, so I reassured her. "Miss, I want to help both of these kids, but please, be honest with me. What happened to Basile? Why is he the way that he is?" Regardless of her tears, her eyes looked into mine. The sadness and fatalism were mixed together in a stare I would remember my entire life. "Basile heard his father die in a car crash while on the phone with him." Despite sitting in a chair, I felt my entire body grow heavier with each passing second. I couldn't move. Images were flashing inside my head. "I'm so sorry for your loss," I said to the woman, who was now barely holding her tears. My words were sincere, but they must have sounded so fake to someone who's still in grievance. Still, I continued to talk in hopes that I would learn more and diffuse the situation. "If I'm not being too indiscreet—" "You already were, you idiot," I told myself. "May I learn more about Basile, how he was prior to this, and how this affected him?" His mother silently nodded, eyes still red, and told me everything. "You see, my son has always been a secluded person with a view of the world that nobody could fully grasp. Among what you would describe, like seeing fictional persons or drawing moves on his own, are things he actually did before. Thankfully, his father did his best to connect with him, and it worked. Basil was always excited to show him his new creation or talk about his latest epiphany, but then the tragedy struck. A hiccup interrupted her tale, so I timidly tried to reassure her. If it's too hard for you, don't feel obliged to continue. She shook her head. No, I feel it's good to let everything out. Another oddity surrounding Basil is his poor luck. Whenever he tries to do something, most of the time it backfires. Some of the more superstitious members of the family even ended up thinking he was cursed. That's obviously not the case. It's ridiculous. But only my husband, his father, had the strength to protest, defend him, against them. Hearing this, a question came to me. Is that outlook on his luck one of the reasons he mostly prefers to keep to himself? She offered a weak, I don't know, as a response before saying, at least fictional characters can't hurt him. Another pause in the conversation happened, the air gradually becoming tenser and tenser. He heard everything. When I asked him to phone his father, I never expected. Her face gradually lost her color. That should have been my cue to stop prodding. But I didn't. I was foolish enough to continue. I've also seen Basil get lost in his mind, even with his new friend. He can cry or laugh about whatever he sees. Is there something other than fictional characters or famous people that he can think about? Has he ever talked to you about it? Wordlessly, his mother stood up and incited me to follow her up the stairs. A bit of a silent walk later, we arrived in the attic, where a little box stood out. It was well kept compared to the dusty furniture all around it. She opened it and took out a stack of papers. He never explicitly told me, but I've seen his drawings, she said before handing them over. I felt like I was going to cry myself. Most had little notes in the left corner, explaining when or how he saw these visions. Most were crudely drawn, but strong with emotions. Some had Quentin happily walking. Some had Basil's father cuddling him or coming to school to take him home. But others were red or black, scribbled messes. Me when Dad got hurt. Dad going elsewhere. Quentin leaving. Me when Mom doesn't love me anymore. His imagination was completely corrupted by tragedy. No matter how hard he tried to forget it, his subconscious would catch up. His positive daydreams would turn to nightmares. He blamed himself for everything. I could now understand what he meant, despite how twisted his -1+1 explanation sounded. He was just a kid, trying to fix his mistake after being given another chance. Although with that said, one of his drawings intrigued me more than others. It was a poorly drawn representation of himself, being held by the throat by a black figure. He haunts me. I presented it to his mother. Miss, what is that? What are you doing? It was that voice again, the voice that shouldn't belong to a child. The two of us turned around instinctively to see Basil, knife in hand, an expression of pure rage on his face. His mother tried to calm him down. Basil, snap out of it. However, instead, his eyes locked onto me, with a look of hatred so intense, he couldn't just describe it with words. He rushed at me and stabbed violently at my knee. The pain was unbelievable. Yells, blood, cries. That's all I saw before I fainted from shock. When I awoke, I was being taken by ambulance. The mother was frantically apologizing to me. I tried to reassure her, but when I saw Basil showing no remorse next to her, I couldn't bring myself to be gentler with her. My fears had come back, and his eyes haunted me to this day. What was he talking about in that drawing? Surely ghosts aren't real. However, what is it that possesses him during these violent outbursts? I think I'll never know for sure. After I recovered from my leg wound, at least as much as I could, the school administration made no concessions. Seeing that I was now forced to have a cane with me for the rest of my life, they promptly excluded Basil from school. Quentin tried to continue going to school, but the bullying and rumors were too tough even for him. He begged to be sent where Basil was. Apparently they reunited in some sort of youth re-education center. I had no idea if I should be opposed to this decision, but it didn't matter. Sadly, that's all there is to it. These conversations and drawings did give me the insight on how Basil saw the world. A lonely place that he might make friendlier, but I couldn't help him. His deep-rooted self-loathing, his general lack of focus, his obsession with Quentin. Speaking of which, neither of them showed up at the class reunion, which happened this year. According to one of their classmates, the soul who actually saw them after they went to rehab, it was better that way. Had Basil crossed a line? Had he rendered Quentin so dependent on him? Just like a lot of things in this post, I don't know. I couldn't even think or say anything when the student told me about it. So, here I am, now 48. 13 years have passed. Multiple children became my pupils, and I didn't encounter another Basil ever again. The doubts are eating me alive as I write this, for failing to offer any kind of solution, for letting this disturbing kid get away. Am I a failure as a teacher?
Gerald Trevin, or just Trevin, had been a friend of my dad's for as long as I've been alive. We moved into Broken Ridge after I was born, and Trevin was one of the first of our neighbors to introduce us to the town. One time, he took us on a tour of the community in his beat-up pickup truck. He even assisted the movers in getting everything into our house. Trevin's 70-something years old and always wears plaid shirts. His demeanor is often carefree, willing to offer a helping hand to anyone in need. He speaks with an accent that makes him sound like a seasoned cowboy with sideburns and a potbelly. No offense to Mr. Trevin, of course. He's the most social person I know. I saw his garage sale sign the other day, so I went over to check it out. When I got out of my car and made my way up his driveway, I could see that his business was fully stocked. He had dozens of antique keepsakes. I also saw a few missing posters stapled to a street lamp. Someone took the time to laminate the posters, plastering them with photos of dogs and cats displayed in color. There was an orange tabby cat on one poster, a Dalmatian puppy on another, and the last one showed a smiling toddler. I sighed and passed them by, focusing on finding Mr. Trevin. He wasn't hard to spot. His plaid shirt, a stark contrast to, well, everything else. Trevin sat in his favorite lawn chair on the front porch, taking sips from a beer can and soaking in the sun. He noticed me walking up and raised his drink. "Toby, my boy, long time no see, huh?" His sunglasses glinted in the sunlight as he smiled at me. "Yeah, it is. How have you been, Mr. Trevin?" I gave him a smile of my own, reaching out to shake his hand. He grasped mine in an iron grip, the skin rough from decades of hard labor. He watched as I took a seat in the other lawn chair, the empty one, next to his. "Same as always, I suppose," he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "My son came by yesterday. We went out to the same restaurant for a couple hours. It's been a year since I've seen him. Can you believe that? How time flies." I nodded, settling into the cushions of the chair. I watched as the clouds glided far above the lawn, shading the greenery and allowing us a reprieve from the sweltering sun. Yeah, time passes pretty fast these days. Trevin turned to me, his hands folded in his lap. "How about you, Tobes? Anything new going on with you?" "No, not really. I bought a dash cam off Amazon, so I guess that's something. Besides that, I don't know." I trailed off with a shrug, not really knowing what else to say. My knees were bouncing gently on the concrete floor, something I usually do when I'm in one place for too long. I'm not the most social person, having spent most of my life keeping to myself for reasons beyond my control. I cleared my throat and focused on enjoying the shade of the trees overhead. We sat in relative silence for what felt like maybe 10 minutes. "Find a girlfriend yet?" I looked over and saw a smirk on his wrinkled face. I told him no, and he chuckled. "Come on, boy, you're a fine-looking young man. I bet countless ladies are swarming you at that store you work at." "Come on, Mr. Trevin. All the girls there are either taken or not interested in dating someone with no experience." This wasn't entirely true, but I didn't tell him that. I let my eyes focus on the middle distance ahead. The house across the street blocked it. It was a fairly large house with a 2-car garage and a wide window on the far left. Mr. Trevin nodded, following my gaze and shifting in his seat. It took him a moment to follow my gaze to the house. He gestured vaguely at it as we sat looking. "Something weird is happening at that house." "What do you mean?" "The Weller family across the street lives there." I gave him a confused look, my brows furrowing slightly. "What do you mean that something strange is going on over there? Looks fine to me." Trevin let out a sigh and leaned back in his chair. "Well, it's just that last night I was taking a walk around the neighborhood. I was coming back here when I looked into the window and, well, I saw him." He pointed at the large window in front of the house where I assumed sat a dining table. From the outside looking in, I could just make out the table and chairs surrounding it. Above it was a crystalline chandelier hanging from a wire or a chain. I could also see a radio as well. "I saw him sitting around the table at, I don't know, 10 in the evening maybe. I didn't think too much of it, just figured they were having some family game night or something. Anyway, it was in the morning when I looked out again, and that's when I noticed it. Their car was gone. They always park their SUV in the driveway because their garage is full of junk. I've seen it countless times, cardboard boxes and bicycles and garbage bins and all that, so I thought it was odd that they would pack their car to the brim and then just come back that night without it." I had to admit, it did sound odd that a family would do something like that. I nodded again and leaned back, idly watching a lone squirrel at the edge of the lawn, inching its way down the tree trunk. "That's interesting, I guess. Did you see anything else last night?" Mr. Trevin took another swig of his beer before setting it back down on the ground. "I did not. I only looked over there for a couple of seconds. They were just eating dinner, and I was tired from walking all evening." "Huh," was all I could say after Mr. Trevin finished. Trevin put his hands on his armrest and stood up. His joints popped and he sighed as he stretched his arms. He glanced at his cluttered driveway, which by now had a handful of people in it. "I'm going to go greet the customers. You're welcome to stay, if you like." I thanked him and watched as he welcomed the newcomers, welcoming them to his property. He took some time to talk quietly to a solemn-looking couple, occasionally glancing at the missing posters at the edge of the property. It wasn't until the next night that I was in his neighborhood again. I had the night off from work, so I didn't want it to go to waste. I ended up taking a walk to Mr. Trevin's neighborhood. It was cool that evening, so I had to wear a windbreaker. I saw the occasional squirrel darting around and plenty of small birds flying overhead. I hadn't even noticed that I had passed by the Weller's house until something moved in my periphery, I turned to see the kitchen window was lit up, casting a warm yellow light into the room. Underneath the bright chandelier was the table, but the seats were empty. I could see a man and a woman on opposite sides of the table. The other two seats had two children also facing each other. Even though the young boy's back was facing the window, I could tell that he wasn't moving. It was as if there were an uncanny reenactment for a family dinner. The family was completely still, devoid of the activity one would usually expect to see. The mother and father didn't move their mouths or gesture with their hands. The children didn't shift in their seats or anything. It was as if someone came in and set up mannequins resembling the family at the dining room table and left them there. I slipped my phone from my pocket and began to record the scene. I zoomed in on the father to get a better look. After a second, the image cleared and I could see that there was no expression on his face. I looked at the other family members and saw the same lack of expression. Keeping my phone focused on the scene, I looked around the neighborhood. I was the only one out there. Many of the houses had dark windows, and the few that weren't had no activity inside. The only thing I actually saw were the dark silhouettes of squirrels and birds fluttering overhead. The dog in the distance, far away, kept barking, its sound echoing across the quiet night air, broken by the rhythmic chirping of crickets. The occasional gust of wind broke the stillness of the forest, sending the dark leaves on the trees rustling. I kept my phone trained on the window for another 30 seconds before I saw it again. I thought I imagined it, but the chandelier was flickering, a ghostly dance of light and shadow. Their faces, blank and frozen like masks, did not show any perspective reaction. As I kept filming, the lights went out on their own. A moment later, the room was once again visible, but there was something different now. The family had vanished, as if they were never there. I slowly lowered my phone, my mind processing what I had just seen. In less than a minute, I had witnessed this family of people not moving an inch, then disappearing after the chandelier started short-circuiting. I'll admit, my first thought after processing what had just happened was, well, that was pretty cool. I pocketed my phone, taking one last glance at the dark window over the Weller house, and hastily walking back the way I'd came. I could feel my chest tightening from anxiety, slowly setting in. I was aware of every noise that I was making as I made the long walk back to my home. I secured the deadbolt on my front door and secured the door chain. Turning to face my house, my chest tightened a little more at how dark it was. Kicking off my shoes, I flipped on every light switch, moving through the place with haste. In less than a minute, my apartment was like a beacon to the outside world. I tossed my coat onto the bed and flopped onto it, taking a deep breath. After a few moments, my heart slowed to a steady rhythm. The tightening in my chest loosened. I rolled onto my back and stared up at the ceiling. This evening had really messed me up, no doubt about it. I hadn't felt this kind of fear in a long time. When I calmed down, I pulled my phone out and opened my gallery. I opened the recording and reviewed it at low volume. I noticed an old radio that seemed to belong back in the 80s or 90s. It was at the back of the room, but the family members obscured most of it. I only saw the top edge of the radio and the antenna protruding from it. In the end, I sent the video to one of my only friends at work. I also sent the video to Mr. Trevin, though I know he won't be able to get back to me until tomorrow. I need someone to verify what I was seeing. This is the only reason I'm writing this, and posting it here. I want to know what I saw tonight. So I'm requesting you guys help. If this is a prank for some kind of show on Prime or whatever, then they probably got the reaction they wanted. I don't know why they would choose a small town in the Midwest, though. Broken Ridge does not get much attention with national publicity. If it wasn't fake or a setup, then I'm not sure what it was. What do you guys think?